Hello and welcome back, everyone, to this keynote speech on authenticity. So we went through a case study last time to have a look at authenticity and the dilemmas around it and questions around it in action. And I would like to dive into some examples now where the original or the real has been mixed with copies in an interesting way, because there are some huge advantages to gain from this mix, not just for us as museum sites, but also in our communication and interpretation with visitors. It's an interesting way of using objects and storytelling together. So let's have a look at some of the advantages of mixing real and copies, if we can call it that. Now, an obvious one is reconstructions and copies. When we create copies, for example, create tools, we get to know how to use them. We can see the techniques behind them. We can test material. We can also test something like the fragility and the robustness of something. So there's a lot of things we can actually test out here. And there are so many examples of places where they do this. This is just one I picked, which is from Denmark. It's from a small Iron Age village where visitors can interact with volunteers using tools, making food, and so on. And these places often get to test the way objects worked and the material that were used. And it's also that it's a great place to learn. You learn a lot about techniques and use for us as professionals, and we also get a new understanding of an object's use simply by trying it. And this is something you can do with copies only, obviously. And that goes for like clothes and textiles, building techniques, and all of that as well. And you will find loads of these places now around the world, and they're really great fun. It's a fantastic way of interacting with visitors and users as well. Another advantage of mixing originals or copies, if you like, is new discoveries on purposes, functions, new expressions, especially visual expressions as well. This is an example from a famous rune stone in Denmark. You have the original to the right there. And this is a so-called picture stone with an early image of Christ you can see there in the middle holding his arms out. The original had colors, but we don't know which exactly. To the left you have an artist's expression of what it could have looked like. So suddenly we start to see and notice different details from the same image, simply because it stands out visually, simply because of the colors. And sometimes we get a new viewpoint from artistic expressions or visuals this way. It can be digital images too. Just by adding colors or doing modern expressions, we actually get to discover new things. And I'm sure, as some of you might have seen, we all know this image of Christ sort of hanging there on the cross, having his arms out like this. This, as you may have noticed, you can especially see it on the photo with the colors. This Christ is not hanging on a cross. He is an embracing Christ. He is standing there holding his arms out in order to embrace everyone into Christianity. And this is an interesting detail because we often make assumptions when we see well-known images. We think we know what they mean, but that's not always the case when we're looking at historical objects. So this is a really interesting way of getting to know new details as well. Another advantage can be to simply get close or closer to details you otherwise would not discover in the original. This is from an experience called the Sistine Chapel experience. It was a traveling exhibition. I caught it when it was in London. It presented these huge original-sized prints of every fresco in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. It was put up, as you can see, in the same way they were pictured in the chapel in the Vatican. So some of them were above you on the ceiling, some of them were on the walls to the side of you there. The prints were amazingly detailed. You could see every brushstroke, every crack, all the colors, also where they had faded. And of course, we can never get this close to the original, because that ceiling, if you've been in the Sistine Chapel, it's about 20 meters above you. It's so high up. And again, crowded with people. You can't really get to see anything in detail. there were some great explanations and references actually to the different parts of the Bible where these stories had come from, the stories pictured in the frescoes. So it was a wonderful way of really diving into the details behind the frescoes and each image, and something that the original couldn't provide in that way, unless you had a book where you could read through and look at all these details. Of course, I actually miss the feeling of standing, in the Sistine Chapel and looking up on that ceiling. But I would have loved to see this, perhaps in connection with the Sistine Chapel experience, maybe in sort of a space outside or something. That would have been amazing to actually go see the original and then dive into the details in an experience like this. Another advantage of mixing real or originals and copies is getting outside the museum, getting outside your premises sometimes. I love this next initiative. This is from a while ago, back in 2008, in the city of York in Northern England, where a project displayed copies of a series of original paintings, including copies of the frames outside the city in different places. So you could experience a copy of a painting outside shops, for example, down by the riverside, outside ruins in the park, and so on. The one to the left there, I just love that one. It was the photo of, you may recognize it, it's called the Ugly Duchess. It's from a Flemish painter, Quentin Matsys. And it was put, this copy of this famous painting was put outside a beauty salon. You might just be able to see it there. So you can spot, I think a bit of like nail polish and stuff like that outside. And I just found that such a great sense of humor. You walk into this beauty salon to focus on your looks, and then this woman hangs outside. But the surprise on people's faces when they suddenly discover a painting looking like an original outdoors, that's just epic. And it definitely put a different focus on the paintings, and also sparked a lot of curiosity that made visitors want to go and see the original. This was a few examples of how sort of fictions or added layers of historical facts and sources can work together. And some of these examples were not from museums, but it's quite easy to see how these experiences could work well with original objects and historical sites. The really important thing here is to be clear about what is historically correct and what is copies or filling in the gaps with imagination and guesses. Be clear on your purpose when using replicas and copies. Whether it's creating an environment where visitors can try out things, try out tools, or you yourself as a museum can experiment with material, if it's highlighting details of images, so they can be enjoyed in detail, which is not possible with the original, or whatever it is, just be clear about why you're putting something up or using copies. Now, as we discovered, visitors don't actually mind copies or replicas. They are okay with us not knowing everything. This is usually rather exciting for them. It's often the gaps in knowledge that attracts the most attention. It's what we don't know that's interesting. As long as we are honest and clear about what we know and what we don't, then it's a lot easier to create a clear purpose for engaging with copies or new forms of interpretation. So, how can we start to address visitors' expectations of authenticity in our museums? Well, a few things. Embrace visitors' reason and motivation for coming, even when it is wrong or fictional. Even if their perspective is wrong or not accurate, it still brought them to you. If your visitors come to see Hamlet, okay, start there then. And then build your own historical sources into their expectations. We never once in the Hamlet Live experience changed the historical facts to accommodate the story of Hamlet. But we did tell a lot through the story of Hamlet, a lot of history through the story of Hamlet. Connect historical facts with visitors' knowledge. Don't try and tell visitors they're wrong. It never goes down well. But build on their knowledge, whatever level it might be at. Meet them where they are, even if they have very limited or wrong knowledge. Use visitors' expectations to spark further curiosity. Make them curious about your collections, your exhibitions, the era that you work with. You have their attention now, so make good use of it. Be as clear as possible in your storytelling about fiction, added layers of history and modern adaptations or influences and historical facts. When you do start mixing fiction or layers of storytelling, modern influences and adaptation, be as clear as you can about it. Let people know what is knowledge coming from historical sources and remains, and what are added layers of interpretation or storytelling, or perhaps added conservation layers or modern influences on objects. Visitors are okay with guesswork or fiction. They really are, as long as it is clear why you use it. So, what can we do in our museums to address some of these challenges then? Well, quite a lot, actually. Robust documentation and research. Ensure a comprehensive documentation and thorough research of artifacts and artworks and historical objects. Such documentation helps establish authenticity and provides valuable historical context. In your conservation and preservation, establish clear conservation and preservation protocols to ensure the integrity of artifacts over time. These practices safeguard authenticity of objects too. Well, it had to come. Technological and digital innovations. Use technology to enhance authenticity, verification, and preservation efforts. For example, the implementation of advanced imaging techniques to examine objects without causing damage. This is a huge one, and of course, technology and digital features are something, it's kind of a speech in itself to dive into that, but it's definitely worth mentioning. Interdisciplinary and international collaborations and partnerships. When we foster collaborations between museum professionals, we bring different perspectives and expertise together. This collaboration can help identify and address challenges from multiple angles and strengthen the public trust as well. And we also, of course, train staff in how we engage in discussions around authenticity when we engage with international organizations like UNESCO and ICOM, and we go to conferences and so on. Community engagement and dialogue. When we engage local communities and minority groups and relevant stakeholders in discussions about authenticity, we also involve them in decision-making around our narratives. And this creates a broader reflection and creates inclusivity effectively. Ethical considerations, we touched on these before. Adhere to ethical guidelines and codes of conduct when dealing with authenticity challenges, because again, it fosters trust. Authenticity education and public outreach. Develop educational programs and exhibitions and public outreach initiatives that emphasize the importance of authenticity. This is a way for museums to empower visitors to critically analyze and appreciate the authenticity of artifacts and of historical contexts. And clear display and exhibition labeling. Clearly communicate the authenticity status of artifacts and the level of interpretation involved in their display. So these things museums are already doing. But the clearer you are on this work, the better prepared you are to address and discuss challenging terms like, for example, authenticity. Right, so what about the future then? How can we prepare for the future of authenticity? Well, one of the best things we can do is to engage in discussion around some of these topics. First of all, technology and digital development. Explore how things like virtual, augmented reality, and AI can enhance visitors' experiences by offering immersive encounters with cultural artifacts and historical settings, and discuss the balance between authenticity and the virtual realm and how museums can navigate this new landscape. Of course, other types of new digital features or technology, that pop up all the time. Keep discussing them. This is an area that moves very fast indeed. Preservation and access. Discuss the opportunities and challenges presented by preservation and access initiatives. Explore how museums can strike a balance between digital collections for wider accessibility while ensuring the integrity and authenticity of the original objects here. Repatriation, a huge one. address the ongoing debates that surrounds the repatriation of cultural artifacts. These are sometimes, as I'm sure you've noticed, heated debates, but keep exploring how museums can navigate these discussions, ensure a respectful approach to authenticity while acknowledging the importance of these discussions and the emotional debates that sometimes come with these. Visitor engagement and co-creative experiences. Examine how involving communities and visitors in the interpretation and presentation of artifacts can enhance authenticity and inclusivity. Remember, new opinions come into society all the time: political, religious, cultural, financial opinions, societal opinions, you name it. And some of these may impact the way we present the past. Be prepared for these discussions and where they might lead. Involve communities when public debates occur, and be a relevant source of information here. Museums have, all the best opportunities for doing this. I also included sustainability and environmental considerations. Address the growing focus on sustainability in museums and how it impacts authenticity, how we use or reuse material from exhibitions, for example, energy consumption, waste. Museums have a responsibility here as well. And our level of involvement in these issues will build trust around authenticity. By continuing to discuss emerging trends like these, museums will stand much stronger in their own preparation and for future discussions and dilemmas surrounding authenticity. We can also encourage visitors to engage in authenticity discussions and inspire them to critically reflect on their own expectations, especially if these are based on fiction. So find the balance that works for you and for your museum. And we can only find that through, ongoing discussions and debates. Okay, this was a lot. So what have we learned on this little journey? Well, apart from the fact that the Mona Lisa was too tiny for so many visitors to have a look at the same time, and that the Sistine Chapel ceiling is way too high up. What have we actually learned? Well, defining authenticity requires a lot of words. And that we have to continue to discuss these in terms of our work. Authenticity keeps developing in our terminology and in our practices, and we must keep defining it to make it relevant in our practices. Visitors have their own idea about authenticity, and sometimes this is influenced by fiction, and they bring this with them when they visit. We cannot ignore that, but we can work with it. We have to include it in our ongoing discussions. Copies and replicas can help us understand details and highlight stories. Visitors and also museum professionals are actually okay with copies and replicas, as they help us understand details, uses, material, perspectives, and stories better when we are communicating and researching the past. Mixing real and copies can create new historical knowledge and help create authentic experiences. When we mix original or real and copies, we can sometimes create totally new experiences and views on our historical research, and at the same time engage new visitors. The gaps in historical knowledge can create an even bigger fascination and curiosity than the things we already know. And we can work with this in our discussion around authenticity. Using copies to test and learn from can help us become more authentic in our historic research and knowledge. Being open and honest, I mentioned this a few times now, about our methods, approaches, and communication is just vital. Being honest in with our material, our stories, our sources, our collections, our objects, our research, and honest with our visitors is something that I feel requires openness, sometimes vulnerability, but always authenticity. When we cultivate a culture of openness and honesty within our museums and in our relationship with visitors, then we foster an environment of authenticity. We have to be open to creating a space where we can keep discussing and disagreeing on and developing these terms and practices like authenticity, and where we are open for new views and perceptions of them as they change in the future, because change they will. As a museum, we can never be 100% authentic, but the closest to being as authentic as we can be is being open and honest about what we do and why we do it. And with that thought, I kind of wanted to say thank you very much for listening to me, and also over to you, because I would really love to hear your views on this. And also, if you have any experiences, please share them, because this is the only way that we can learn from one another, and that we can keep growing and developing as museums, as professionals, and also in our communication with our visitors and in our storytelling and research. So please do share. Thank you very much.